Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. This webinar is Design Thinking for Scholars, and it's providing an overview of an approach to developing and testing a framework for challenge-based research. The webinar is presented by the Network of Leadership Scholars, which is a community of practice affiliated with the Academy of Management. And this webinar is in anticipation of the Network of Leadership Scholars event, which is being held in Boston immediately before the Academy of Management's annual meeting on August 1st, the evening of August 1st and August 2nd. And it is the team that's been bringing this together is a small but mighty team composed of Naga Sivasubramaniam, Sarinda Kahai, Mary Ulbeen, Laura Erskine, and Chris Dembeck. So welcome to our webinar today. My name is Drew Marshall. I am your host today, and I'm the CEO and principal of Primed Associates, and I'm working alongside the Network of Leadership Scholars to deliver this program. Just to give you a little bit of an overview in terms of what to expect today, this, given that it's only a 1-hour webinar, is going to be an overview only. For those of you who are seeking a deep dive into design thinking or the practice of design thinking, this is probably not the best opportunity for you today. That said, I'm more than willing to answer questions offline, and you should have my email address, which was part of the link to the webinar today. So you're more than welcome to ping me with questions if you have any, and I'll do my level best to answer those. As I've noted in the email, if I don't have an answer for you, I will certainly do my level best to find some. So today is an overview only. We're going to share the model and the 5 components of the model, and you see that on screen in front of you. And you should have received a PDF copy of that attached to the registration form. And we'll talk about the implications of action as they relate to research and how design thinking can help expand the range of research possibilities for you. So it looks like we've got a reasonably full complement of people. We've got about 20 attendees. We were expecting a few more, but I understand everybody's schedule is quite busy. So let's begin, shall we? Well, the model that you see in front of you is based on the work of a number of different organizations and groups. And our intent was to build on the work of the Network of Leadership Scholars program that was held in conjunction with last year's Academy meeting. And we think that the work we did in San Antonio was a good start, and we wanted to take that even further and deeper. So in the absence of having a clear framework, a clear model that we could share, we decided to pull something together, and we've relied on many different sources to be able to do this. So while we've added our own tenor and flavor to make it more relevant for scholars, please understand that this is a first draft, and that as a result of your use of the model and additional feedback and input, we'll expand the model over time. And we look forward to working on it and fleshing it out with you. So let's dive into the Design Thinking for Scholars origin, shall we say. Now, Design Thinking for Scholars is founded in the domain of design thinking, which has a number of different inputs and a number of different intents. So we'll talk about the foundations of design thinking first, and we'll begin with where design thinking came from. It's an offshoot of design for user experience and design for utility, and the aesthetics of design that was a part of a movement in the 1980s. The term originated in a paper in the 1980s out of Stanford, and was actually published in a seminal paper by Richard Buchanan from MIT in 1992, who crafted the topic Design Thinking and Wicked Problems. And what Buchanan did was actually very close to the focus that we're taking with design thinking from a research and scholarship perspective, where design thinking previously had been the domain of businesses and the corporate enterprise in terms of making products and services more readily accessible. Design thinking in Buchanan's context was actually unlocking the power of design thinking to apply it to particularly intractable problems such as pollution or waste or climate change and the like. So for our purposes, we're tapping into what Buchanan's intent was. And one of the foundations for our overarching framework, our 5-step framework, comes from a company named IDEO. IDEO is based in Palo Alto, and the company IDEO is one of the preeminent design firms in the world. They have offices across Europe and Asia, but their hub, is in Palo Alto. And the reason it's in Palo Alto is that that's where the 3 originating firms that joined together to form IDEO were originally based. And the original CEO of the company was a man by the name of David Kelly. And Kelly is the primary driver behind systematizing and codifying what design thinking could actually be. And it's through IDEO's practice of design thinking and their acclaim as a result of applying design thinking that many subsequent extensions to design thinking have taken place. One of which was done under the direction of IDEO, was design thinking for educators. And it's the design thinking for educators model that we've actually tapped into most strongly. The standard design thinking model that's employed in the business enterprise is a slightly simpler model. It has 3 phases instead of the 5 that we're exploring. And the reason why we chose to work with the design thinking for educators model is it gave us much more flexibility in terms of exploring the model overall. It doesn't mean that we might not collapse that over time or modify that dramatically, but it gives us a common framework, a common language with which we can start. So, from IDEO's perspective, design thinking is all about the intersection of 3 key concepts: the place of people, the place of business, and the place of technology in coming together to form an integrated whole. When we look at design thinking in this particular context, we're talking about desirability, viability, and feasibility. And you'll see from the Venn diagram on the page here that there are different kinds of innovation that can be brought about as a result of using 2 of these different cores as a part of your design thinking foundation. So if you combine desirability with viability, the end result is an emotional innovation. You're talking about branding or relationships or marketing. If you bring viability and feasibility together in terms of business and technology, it's usually process innovation. So we're talking about incremental changes. It's the kind of change that you would get with a lean program or a Six Sigma program. If you talk about the intersection between desirability and feasibility, you're talking about functional innovation. So it's incremental innovation as a change to products or services. What IDEO decided was that they needed to expand and contain all 3 of those different elements. So the combination of desirability, viability, and feasibility became the play space for design thinking. And it's the innovation of experience in the center of those that is at the heart of design thinking. Because design thinking in this context, or the primary driver, is that it's a human-centric approach. It places people firmly at the heart. It's all about the challenges that are identified at a human level, the interaction and engagement at a human level, and the collaboration to resolve those issues through the application of design. So this became a starting point for a conversation about design thinking that was carried into many businesses. The challenge with it, though, is it started to become a little, well, how should we put it? It started to become a little the domain of business only, and it became almost a clique, and innovation and design thinking became synonymous with buzzwords and other consulting jargon. As a result, you ended up with this particular cartoon, which I've always loved, and I share it with all of my clients regarding design thinking. But it refers to the Advice Lords, and it's a guide to design thinking gang signs, a play on urban gang signs. So we have the Venn Vipers, we have the 2x2 boys, and of course we have Maslow's disciples. So for the social scientists among you, this one goes out to you. But bottom line, I think for me, is how can we quickly and rapidly explain the value of design thinking to those people who are not directly associated with it. And I think this next image is perhaps the most simple articulation of the journey of design thinking. The line represents that journey in terms of intellectual pursuit. And this was actually developed by David Kelly, and subsequent people have modified it over time. But if you look at the top, we journey from uncertainty through a recognition of patterns and a forming of insights to a clarity and a focus and an eventual design that resolves a particular need. The tools that we use are research, the formulation of concepts, the prototyping of those concepts, and the activity of design. By going from left to right through this particular model, you can see how design thinking as an approach helps bring simplicity out of chaos. It helps bring structure where previously there hadn't been any recognizable structure. So in terms of what we're trying to achieve through design thinking for scholars, we're looking to accelerate our approach to more useful research, accelerate the collaboration across the research domains or areas of practice, and also increase the collaboration with stakeholders and subjects as part of that research push. From this particular image, we move into the first of the 5 different components in our model for design thinking for scholars. The design thinking for scholars phases are from left to right across the top. We have discovery, we'll explore that next, then interpretation, ideation, experimentation, and evolution. So discovery encompasses these 3 areas: defining the challenge, in which we understand the challenge that we face. We define a particular audience with whom we're going to collaborate to design a solution for or design a research program with. We'll build a team in order to deliver that research, and we'll share what we know about the particular challenge. We'll lay the groundwork for accelerating our action. So I make a plan, a specific plan, identify sources of inspiration, identify and invite practitioners to participate, and identify researchers who may be outside of our initial team. And then schedule the events necessary to gather the information from those sources. And when we're gathering them, we're actually searching for inspiration. And that means immersion in the available content. That could be previous research or discovery. It could be learning from individuals, groups, experts, or practitioners. It could be going to first sources or primary sources. It could even be learning from observation, running a series of field observations from an ethnographic or anthropological perspective, or learning from adjacent fields. We might be researching in one scientific area but exploring an adjacent scientific area to see if we can capture any other inspirations, or learning from fields that are not necessarily diametrically opposed but quite distant from our own. And the idea being that we want to seek inspiration in unusual places. So what is discovery? Well, discovery encompasses a range of activities designed to create a compelling foundation for our approach to design thinking for scholars. And at its heart, it's all about appropriate questioning. What we're trying to do is inquire, and through inquiry, identify gaps in our understanding and use that as a springboard into appropriate research and exploration. The first place we start is the idea of developing an effective team. Working in concert is essential so that we're not working at counter purposes to each other. It doesn't mean we don't have differences of opinion. It doesn't mean we don't have different areas of expertise or knowledge that we bring to bear on the subject. But it comes down to building a team that can effectively collaborate together and build on and capitalize on each other's strengths. So as you consider the practitioners or the researchers that are going to be a part of your team, if you're leading a design thinking for scholars effort, consider what differences they bring to the table. Homogeneity is not going to be valuable to you in terms of exploring the outer limits of what design thinking can apply. The other approach is, one of my favorite quotes comes from this particular gentleman, a wartime Prime Minister, Churchill, certainly somebody who understood what it meant to be successful. And his great quote that I often share is that we can if we fail to plan, then we will plan to fail. The idea being that unless we put some basic building blocks in place, it's very difficult for us to succeed over time. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a formal structure with particular days allocated, but it certainly does mean you have to have a clear set of expectations for what each other should do and should accomplish. And it means you have to have commitments to those expectations over time. Now, for people who research by themselves, the idea of setting expectations for yourself is as simple as a to-do list, I would guess. But when you're thinking of design thinking, none of these actions stand alone, and none of these actions is actually going to be delivered to yourself. You're going to be sharing them with a wider community, which will increasingly get wider over time. So the key here is to have a plan, a framework that you can actually plug people and resources into as they come available. Because from the perspective of anybody who has been practicing design thinking, the organizing construct for a design thinking approach is actually not an organization chart or a structure in that sense. It's the network. And where you start in the network is only the beginning of a journey that will make this network greater and greater over time. And the reason why we want to build this network over time is because through our exploration, it provides us with access to the resources, the materials, and the knowledge that will make our research more effective as we explore and widen that network. It's not, for some, it may seem a challenge to share the fact that you are going to seek others to participate in your design thinking work as a scholar. But in terms of jealously guarding that work, design thinking really doesn't work under those particular conditions. So this is very much a collaborative and shared model, and it may be a challenge for some to participate and grow through this. And based on that network may lead you as a researcher to a much clearer understanding of your subjects. On the screen here you can see a basic chalk outline of a distribution curve. And we use the distribution curve to articulate what we're trying to do when we talk about the subjects that we want to focus on from a design thinking perspective. From a user experience perspective, if I'm working with a product development team, I want to explore each of the ends of this particular distribution curve because I'm looking for extreme users of the product. On the far left, I'd be looking for somebody who does not like the product and in fact may even hate the product and speaks loudly against it. On the extreme right of the curve, I have people who love the product and are so much advocates for the product that they are essentially a sales force or a team of evangelists that would exist whether or not I chose to provide them with a product overall or access to that product. More often than not, when we focus our research, we focus on discrete pools. What we're looking at here is actually two very different pools, and this is a marked change from most research in terms of exploring initial ideas. So that's another part of the discovery process that I wanted to mark out and call out as different. The other area that you of course would understand is that the amount of information that will be available to you for research purposes or for exploration purposes is probably astronomical. The judicious management of that information is the key. It's not the availability, it's how you curate it, it's how you edit it, it's how you organize it and access it in order to provide you with opportunities to form insights. And that's what you're striving for. You're striving for earlier and earlier insights that will help propel you into the work of designing optimal research outcomes. And that use of material, that use of data means that you are better prepared for the next step in design thinking for scholars, which is the step of interpretation. So what is interpretation? Well, interpretation in this particular context encompasses stories and meaning making and framing opportunities. In terms of telling stories, it's about capturing your learnings and sharing inspiring stories with each other and building on the stories of each other. So this is actually quite a change from most, I think, most scholarly pursuits in terms of research. The idea that you would put storytelling at the heart of one of the steps of your research is probably a little unusual. But the value of telling stories is it allows you to gain, rather than a cursory understanding of the subject matter, it allows you to get an empathetic understanding of the subject matter. And that empathetic understanding actually can drive a lot of the deeper understanding that you will have overall of the subjects in play. The next step 5, is the search for meaning. So it's questioning our preconceptions. It's identifying patterns, and pattern recognition is a critical component at this stage. It's revealing themes, it's making sense of findings, and it's recognizing that sometimes what we think makes sense to us does not in actual fact make sense to us. So it's understanding that failure is a part of the process overall. And finally, this step ends with defining insights. And insights are those things that we call news you can use. It is compelling, it is universal, it's truth, and it's backed up by the data and the research that you've done to date in terms of laying the groundwork. From there we go to framing opportunities, and the opportunities are essentially the research opportunities that we're identifying. So we translate the insights that we've made into areas of inquiry, and we create framing questions using what's called the how might we framework. The idea is that it's active and it's investigatory, or framed as inquiry, and it's framed as a collaborative question. How might we? A critical component of design thinking, and at the heart of what we hope will be the design thinking for scholars model going forward. And last but by no means least, you make those opportunities visible. So interpretation for us covers a whole range of particular actions. The symbol that we've chosen for interpretation is this concept of a maze, and the idea that you're getting closer and closer and closer to a key insight as you journey through the data that you're gathering. Interpretation is where we begin to drill down into that data, and it's the data that we gather that serves to inform our insights and create an opportunity for us. The first place we start, though, is actually coming back to collaboration. I mean, when you consider collaboration as part of research, this is a key aspect of this step in the model, because this is where you'll be playing to each other's strengths, you'll be working the plan and modifying the plan as necessary. And by coming together as a team and reflecting on what's going on, you can learn from each other's previous actions and move the design thinking process forward. That process is also moved forward through the step of direct inquiry. Clarification may require additional direct engagement, so interviews and field investigations, which are data gathering and not research. The research itself will come later, once we've identified through ideation, which is the next step, what our approach is going to be and what subject we're going to choose to tackle. Now, from a design thinking perspective, I highlighted the fact that we would look at extreme users. From a research perspective, the different pools of subjects, practitioners, researchers that we would care to involve in the process, each will come together and each will reflect a particular subject matter area or area of expertise or an experience that we want to tap into. But the only way we can do that is to bring those voices into a similar context and actually have them give voice to their experience and their subject matter expertise. While previously, from a research perspective, you might isolate and just explore each one of those areas or those facets of the research opportunity in a singular fashion, Design Thinking for Scholars creates a framework in which you can bring all of those elements together, and in fact it's recommended because it's that cross-fertilization of ideas and experiences that will actually be quite rich when we move into ideation. And by allowing for the voices of each of the constituent groups to be heard, you can also then use that to supplement the documentation that you've already developed over time. Based on that exploration, you'll be in a very data-rich environment, and the challenge at this point will be to identify a specific opportunity. It will not come up and shake your hand and introduce itself. Believe me, it won't. So you have to be vigilant about scanning for larger research opportunities based on your original design challenge, the challenge that you posed early on in the discovery phase of the model, which is the very first step, defining the challenge. So my caution in this particular step in interpretation is recognizing that you'll be swimming in data. You might not be able to see the forest for the trees, so to speak, and essentially what you need to do is keep working through the data gathering process. It can be time consuming, it can be quite tiring at times, but when you move to the next step of the design thinking for scholars process, ideation, you'll see how all of that input will pay off. And as I mentioned previously, one of the challenges for us from a design thinking perspective is this concept that failure is not an enemy. It is okay to fail. And from a failure perspective, that's our greatest opportunity, our richest opportunity for learning. So you have to allow for failure. You have to allow for failure. You have to allow for the fruitless pursuit of data and blind ends, because failures are rich lesson providers to us. Because by the time we get to the end of the interpretation phase, what we're going to be doing is using this section as a launch pad into ideation. So you've got to be willing to identify the seed of an idea that can grow, which may require careful attention and may require further inquiry and more data. And at this point in reflecting on the design thinking for scholars model, I would suggest that there is no point at which you cannot return to a previous phase or a previous step in the model overall. Even though we're going through this model in a linear fashion, my recommendation to you is that you can move through it over time, over a number of times. Which leads us to ideation. So ideation is composed of two what would seem quite elemental steps. The first is generating research topics, and we'll do this through brainstorming. We'll talk a little bit about what brainstorming encompasses and how to drive brainstorming overall when we're together in Boston. Needless to say, brainstorming is a key component of the richness of the design thinking model and the design thinking for scholars model. And being effective at facilitating brainstorming is a key skill to develop over time. From generating those research topics through brainstorming, we'll move into refining those research topics, and there are a number of different ways we can do that, from clustering of ideas and separating those ideas to assessing the relative validity of research topics based on prior experience or practitioners' understanding. And it's the prioritization of research topics that will lead us into the identification of the primary research topic, which will become the focus of our initial efforts in experimentation. That said, even though we prioritize the research topics, it doesn't mean if one research topic that we prioritize over another is less fruitful for us that we can't go back and select another among the research topics that we've identified. So in terms of ideation, I talked a little bit about brainstorming. I'll talk about the challenges of brainstorming and the tools that can be used in brainstorming. And the primary driver behind ideation is, of course, applying the knowledge that we have to exploration. And it's generating research topics and refining them so that we can begin to take meaningful action from an experimentation perspective. The ideation step brings together a combination of ideas. It brings together the creativity of a group of people. This signpost reflects some of the critical ingredients in innovative thinking that should be found in the design thinking for scholars model overall. It will be a challenge in terms of motivation. It is a challenge in terms of stimulation, creativity, and inspiration. But the bottom line is it should drive you and compel you forward. If you get stuck in ideation, take a step back. Consider whether or not the initial design challenge that you framed for yourselves is actually still appropriate and still of value to you as you move forward. The challenge for us is the idea that we have a sea of ideas. Design thinking at this point is a volume game. We need to explore a range of different ideas in order to come up with the compelling research topic that's going to drive us forward. As two-time Nobel laureate Linus Pauling was heard to say, the way to get a good idea is to get lots of ideas. And the additional part of that particular quote was, and to throw away the bad ideas, which a lot of people don't remember. So instead of having a sea of ideas, Linus Pauling said, have a sea of ideas and then make sure that you've got the appropriate bucket or cup or thimble to take away from that sea to begin your effort and your work. Because out of this sea of ideas, you're going to try and find some order. And the challenge in the ideation component is we use brainstorming from a design thinking perspective to generate a number of ideas. The challenge when you ask people to brainstorm is, and this is often anticipated, is that people will react negatively to the idea that they need to be creative on demand. So what IDEO has done, and what we'll share with you, are 7 different rules, I should say, around brainstorming. We shared them with the participants in the Network for Leadership Scholars program last year. We'll share them again this year. These are the only rules that IDEO as an organization actually adheres to. They don't adhere to any others, and these rules, these brainstorming rules, are in each of the rooms, the physical spaces in which they brainstorm at their various offices. And when they're working with a client remotely, they take the rules and they list them. So it will make it easier for you as a team to brainstorm. And the challenge is that we need to put ourselves in a situation where we can allow ourselves to be not only surprised by the ideas that we come up with, but surprised by the ideas that others come up with as well. We want to make sure that at this stage we're not editing or editorializing the ideas that come up. We want to make sure that we capture them and capture them as rapidly as possible and explain them so that others can build on them over time. The tools that we use, of course, are Post-it notes. Anybody who works in the innovation space or the ideation space is ever thankful to the team of people at 3M in Minnesota for the creation of the Post-it note trademark to 3M. Post-its are an invaluable tool, and the reason they're invaluable for design thinking is because of the flexibility of organizing, the flexibility of combining those ideas after they're formulated. You know, an interesting observation is connected to a key piece of data. That key piece of data has a passing remark that seems profound in retrospect, which can be combined with it. An overlooked subject can be introduced to the mix and added to the whole, and a great quote is added just to finish it off. So this combination of different ideas can be brought to bear on coming up with a particular research topic or series of research topics overall. And the last aspect I'll leave you with is another cartoon from one of my favorites. This is Tom Fishburne, who has a whole great range of quite witty, very pithy cartoons, business cartoons primarily. He's at tomfishburne.com. But the reason I love this, it's the quintessential problem with idea generation, certainly in a corporate context, is the idea that, okay, everybody, I want you to be very creative, I want you to be very smart. Okay, enough of being creative, being smart, go back and do your day jobs. And here Fishburne has created a sorting mechanism for us in terms of ways we can resolve all of these fantastic ideas that the group has pulled together. While this is a comedic look at that particular editorial approach, what we're doing in ideation is generating ideas and actually prioritizing among the ideas that we have. And as I mentioned, there are different sets of tools and techniques that you can use in terms of refining those research topics, in terms of creating clusters, combining ideas, or separating a single idea into its constituent components, all of which gives us a very rich source of data for generating research topics. Now, the method of prioritizing among the research topics is entirely up to you as a research team. There are any number of ways that I use with my clients, everything from polling and giving people an opportunity to vote on their favorites, all the way through to using a decision matrix and a clear set of objectives to differentiate between the value of each of those particular research or intended research topics. Once you have that prioritized set of research topics, this becomes your departure point for the next step in our phase, in our model overall, and that is experimentation. This is the 4th phase in our Design Thinking for Scholars model. It consists of 2 key programs, I guess 2 key steps of work. First is making a prototype. Now, there was a lot of discussion around the inclusion of the word prototype as it relates to research. It's not necessarily a very strong fit because it's not used in that particular context very readily, if at all. But the reason why I wanted prototyping to be a part of the model is because I wanted people to have a sense that at this stage what you're arriving at is something that is transitory. It has a degree of ephemera to it. The idea that it's an initial starting point. It's something that you can bang out. It's something that you can stretch. It's something that you can tear up and discard if necessary. But the idea that you would develop a theory and then from that theory draft a particular approach to it. How might you take this research topic that you've identified, expand your approach to it, and then determine how you're going to address it? What's the outcome going to be? Is it going to be a research design? Or is it going to be another framework? Is it going to be an intervention with a particular subject pool? Or is it going to be a knowledge product or a piece of curricular design that you might explore? Once you've gone through that particular approach, then you'll share and test that theory, making sure that you've really understood the limits or the outside limits of that prototype overall. And based on that, then you can begin to conduct some smaller experiments. And these experiments are ways for you to understand whether or not the research topic you've chosen and the way you've chosen to frame that research topic is an appropriate one, if it's a valuable one, if it's adding to the sum of all knowledge, or if it's perhaps close but not quite. The conducting of experiments allows you at a low-cost way to explore that research topic without doubling down and putting all of your resources to work on an overarching program. That program can come towards the end of the experimentation phase as you identify those research opportunities that, through testing and experimentation, rise to the top in terms of value, in terms of fascination, in terms of interest, in terms of creativity. In experimentation, we're focused on the idea that we're growing from all of this effort. We're growing something new and unique and profound and something that will add value to the wider community. I have a background in systems thinking, and one of my professors once said that you have to think of systems thinking in terms of an oak tree. Systems thinking is not just the oak tree and everything around that, but think of the genesis of the oak tree from an acorn. Quite literally, the oak tree has unfolded itself from the seed that is the acorn, and the systems that are involved in that are much broader than those basic systems that exist in and around the oak tree by itself. So from something quite small, something quite large, quite profound can grow over time. And that's always resonated with me with regards to design thinking. From small ideas, from small kernels of interest or intrigue, we can grow some pretty profound solutions from a design thinking perspective. As we've previously discussed, design thinking's approach is all about communication. It's human-centric. Never is it more human-centric than in the experimentation phase. This is a high involvement phase in the design thinking approach where we expand beyond the realm of our initial set of our research team, and we once again explore a much more broad range of collaborators, seeking once again to extend beyond our network. It's dynamic, it's interactive, and it requires, as I said, human centricity. Based on that, we can come up with prototypes. Now, I'm going to share with you different ways of prototyping in the physical space world, but I'll also leave you with the question: what does a prototype look like in the research domain? What is a prototype for a researcher? You all have thought experiments. You all have models that you might sketch on a whiteboard or on an easel sheet or on a notepad, or if you're technically proficient, you might do it on your iPad or other device. But the bottom line is, the prototype is used for advancing our thinking. It's used to pose questions: what if, how might, and it's used to answer those in the most concrete or meaningful way possible so that we can advance our idea further. This particular wooden prototype you see is probably the first or second version of one of Canon's earlier digital cameras. They made the whole camera, including the form factor, out of wood, and inserted key components that they knew needed to be in the prototype because other parts of the Canon ecosystem in terms of flashes and lenses needed to be fitted to the device. So that's another consideration for us from a prototyping perspective. How might we make a prototype that actually fits with what already exists? Where do other perspectives, other bodies of research, bodies of knowledge, where do they attach to what it is we're trying to accomplish? As I had said, it's design thinking is a human-centric approach. Involving user communities is something that the software and hardware industries have done for quite some time. How might you answer key questions about your concept? In terms of software developers, they use user communities through two key prototyping phases, which are called by the names alpha testing and beta testing. Alpha testing is a very, very rough idea. It might literally be showing somebody the software concept as a wireframe on a screen or as a sketched diagram. The beta testing is where the product itself is mostly fully formed, and it enables users to get some sense of what the final experience might be. The use of diagramming in the context of creating a set of storyboards is another key tool for people who are prototyping. And in actual fact, the movie industry uses storyboards to reveal the outcome before any work is done. And my favorite story about the use of storyboards comes from the movie company Pixar. Pixar, before they begin identifying characters and computer generating a single image, they will storyboard 100 different frames of the entire story. So they will come up with a story idea, and they will have 100 images that reflect that story from beginning to end, including all of the climactic points and denouements that exist within that movie construct. And that is given to everybody who works on the movie. Those 100 storyboard images are given to the actors who do the voiceover work, to the technicians who are doing the coloring, to the animators who are building the wireframes and designing the characters that are going to be loved by your children or grandchildren in many cases. So the storyboard in and of itself is a useful tool because it basically is capturing experiences which might be quite valuable from a research perspective. One of the last areas I'll leave you with is from the product domain. You might recognize this. This probably is sitting in some of your kitchens. This is a pizza cutter. Now, this is the standard pizza cutter. It's a wooden handle with a metal disc used for cutting pizza. However, this could be improved, and in fact, a kitchen tools company called Xylus decided to use design thinking to overcome some of the inadequacies of the pizza cutter as it appears. And what they came up with was this. Now, how did they get from that single handle to this hemisphere-shaped handle over the blade? Well, they looked at incorporating the feedback that they discovered when they went out and did observational studies of older people working in their kitchens, primarily with arthritis, and younger children who wanted to cut the pizza in their family and just didn't have the arm strength and the dexterity to be able to manipulate the wooden handle pizza cutter. And they discovered that by looking at those two extremes, the elderly and the very young in the kitchen, there was an area of commonality between them. And this is the end result. So this enables somebody with both of their hands to move the pizza cutter over the pizza using their upper body as the weight to cut through the dough. A simple solution, but they wouldn't have discovered that very readily unless they'd identified the needs of those two communities. And from an experimentation perspective, they tried a number of different form factors to get from the wooden handled device to this. The last area I'll leave you with is the arts. The arts are probably one of the best examples of the use of experimentation. In fact, much modern art is quite literally an experimentation. The artwork is an experiment in framing a way of looking at the world. The two images I'm going to share with you are from an artist by the name of Mark Jenkins. He does predominantly street art in cities, and the way he uses his art is to cause people to reconsider their environments, their physical environments. So in this particular case, he uses this newspaper man reading a newspaper as a way of highlighting the fact that the streets of this particular city were often littered with newspapers from these dispensers, and you see there's a dispenser just behind this particular man. In this next context, Jenkins was basically using the concept of this quite appalling environment, this discard, this waste, and the idea that he was going to reframe it by having these puppies playing. Well, look, the interesting thing about the puppies is that they're kind of ghost images. So his experiment was trying to say, drawing attention to the fact that this waste is here, it's been here for months, and in fact, these puppies were placed on a pile of debris that had been there for over a year. And what he was trying to do was shock people into recognizing that this was the case, that this waste had been left here after somebody had been evicted from their home. So the idea that through experimentation we can cause us to reframe or rethink what we're working on should also be top of mind for us all. And this leads us to the last section in our model, which is evolution. So we've worked our way through discovery, through interpretation and ideation and experimentation, and now we find ourselves in evolution. And evolution is all about codifying the learnings, and that's integrating those research findings into existing research and creating useful knowledge product. But it's also about identifying additional opportunities. Where else might we explore? How else might we use this research? And it's refocusing that into a new challenge. And in this sense, design thinking becomes an iterative approach. We can go through the design thinking model multiple times and can expand our range of understanding from a research perspective. And lastly, we build on that research. We prepare to transfer our research understandings to practitioners, helping them derive value from that research. We present the concept, and we build strategic partnerships, looking for ways that we can expand the impact of the research outcomes overall. And last but by no means least, it means that we explore sharing news stories. We grow, we foster the idea that design thinking for scholars is not a one-time only approach. It's a model that we can continue to use and reuse over time. So, and that's why this particular image was chosen to represent evolution. It's a variant of the recycle, reuse, repurpose symbol that many of you would know. One of the challenges when you get to the end of the design thinking approach is the data that is produced as a result of this effort. For us, it's about managing the volume of data. How accessible do you want it to be? Certainly, if you're going to make your work the foundation for others, you need to explore ways that you can share it. And that might mean communicating face-to-face. It might mean dialogue. It might mean creating seminars or opportunities to share that research. It might mean documentation, all of which you're familiar with. But it also might mean exploring opportunities like creating webinars or recorded events or creating something that lives online and has a life of its own. So there are different ways that you can explore to enable your data to be accessed by others. How can you extend the useful life of your work and increase its meaningful impact would be my question to you. Because all of this effort should spark. It should spark an idea. It should spark you to take this and share it with others. It should spark you to invite still more people to participate in the work that you do. Because design thinking's approach is all about aiming for a particular target. What's the challenge that we're going to address, and what are the different ways that we can address that particular challenge? But from addressing that challenge, we might discover that it's not one challenge we face, it's multiple challenges. And it's the challenge after the challenge that becomes something that would drive us forward. So from our context of design thinking for scholars, the idea that it's a model that you can use, that you can stretch and frame, it also has a utility and a life of its own. If you choose to use it, you'll find that the returns for using design thinking for scholars can be quite great, because the outcomes are actually quite energizing. And last but by no means least, I would say that in terms of design thinking for scholars as a model, the future is yours. This is yours to do with what you will. It's yours to extend, to expand. A source document will be provided for those attending the Boston event. It will be a PDF and a physical manual that you'll be able to use and share, and it will be provided to you, I'm hoping under a Creative Commons license, but that will be a source of more data building on the webinar that you've seen today, providing you increased background for each one of the component steps of the 5-phase model that is design thinking for scholars. So here's our model. our model, and I stress that, it's our version 1. We plan on using it and using many of the aspects of it when we're in Boston, primarily focusing on discovery, interpretation, and ideation. And after the event, we're hoping to track the use of experimentation and evolution as practitioners and researchers go out into the field. So thank you for your time. That concludes the actual presentation of the webinar. And my name is Drew Marshall. I'm with Primed Associates, and there is my email address. If you need to get in contact with me, please feel free to do so. At this time, if you've got any questions, please send them through via the chat function that you would see in the right-hand side in the viewing box. I'd be happy to answer what questions I can at this stage. I'm seeing if I can actually help turn the mute off for the attendees. And unfortunately, it looks like I'm unable to unmute for the attendees. So the chat function is what we have. If you have any questions, please send those through via the chat function, and I will address them as I can. Okay, I'm not seeing any come through at this stage. Oh, here we go. Here are some key questions. So, how is failure being defined? And that was a question from Kelly Fisher. In terms of failure, essentially, failure for design thinking practitioners are unexpected outcomes that cause the experiment that we deliver not to work. I've got a really simple model for that. There was a client I was working with that was seeking to become more sustainable. So they decided to try a small experiment in their office. They replaced all of the paper cups with coffee mugs. And they put them out and they put a sign up and said, please consider the environment, use one of these coffee mugs. When you're finished, please place your coffee mug in the dishwasher. They put the sign up, put the coffee mugs out, went away, came back 15 minutes later. All of the coffee mugs had been replaced with paper cups, and the sign had been taken down. Well, one of the challenges was that they neglected to discuss what they were trying to do with one of the primary stakeholders in the organization, which was the facilities manager. And she quite rightly said, look, I've tried this before, and when I've done it previously, everybody left their dirty coffee cups in conference rooms, at their desks, and it just became a mess, and I ended up having to clean it up. So unless you can provide a better solution, I'm not willing to let this go forward. So that was a failure as an experiment in terms of the original intent of the experiment, which was to see if people would use the coffee cups, but they identified through the experiment a critical stakeholder that they wouldn't have discovered otherwise, or neglected through the design of their experiment. So that's the kind of failure we're talking about. We're not talking about the cost of thousands and millions of dollars. What we're talking about is an opportunity to learn. How does this framework fit in with an existing research stream I'm currently involved with? I can see how this can help jumpstart a stream of research, but I'm not sure how it fits in with an existing research. I think to that end, Naga, I think what you might do is actually step back to the originating question for your design challenge in terms of the research, and assess whether or not you've actually gone as far as you could from an inspiration perspective. So you can reverse in your research approach and actually go back to the beginning of the model and say, okay, I didn't use design thinking at the outset of this particular research approach. What if I explore some of the basic ideas in design thinking for scholars and apply them to the research? Would that give me a different result? It might validate what you're doing, but it also might give you some other opportunities that you might not have recognized. Tanvi Kathari has asked, what is the goal and agenda for the Boston workshop? The Boston workshop is focused on using the Design Thinking for Scholars model, but using it in a practical manner. We're focused on applying this particular model on the topic of emergent leadership at the bottom of the pyramid. So we're bringing the Network of Leadership Scholars event into alignment with the Academy of Management's overarching theme in terms of approaching management across the board. Our desire is to focus on this concept of emergent leadership. We've decided to scale it in a quite sharp and focused manner. And to that extent, the agenda is on the first evening, we'll have a panel discussion with practitioners who are involved in not-for-profit work and NGO work and at the quote-unquote the bottom of the pyramid, which is looking at economically disadvantaged communities from around the world, and what emergent leadership looks like and what the emergent leadership needs are as it relates to engagement with those communities. The next day will be the application of Design Thinking for Scholars, so that would be on the 2nd. We'll spend the day exploring the first 3 phases of Design Thinking for Scholars as it applies to the research opportunities in and around emergent leadership at the bottom of the pyramid. Jim Ulrich is asking, where do you see empathy and understanding for the intended beneficiaries of our research fit into the process? Jim, it's throughout the process. I think an empathetic understanding is what you're striving for from a design thinking perspective. The reason it is highly human-centric and collaborative is that you're striving for an understanding of how people think and feel about the context in which they're experiencing a challenge or experiencing the challenge that we've identified. And the idea is that you're working alongside and with subjects as opposed to working at them from a research perspective. Do I know about experiences in corporate social responsibility research using design thinking perspective? I know that IDEO has a focus on corporate social responsibility as it relates to design thinking. I myself have not explored that with them or explored it in my own practice at this stage. I've done work in the area of sustainability and environmental impact around design thinking, but in terms of the actual CSR function, no, that's not anything that I'm familiar with. But perhaps we can use that question. This is a question from Milton Sousa. We can use that question as one of our areas of investigation in and around the panel on the first evening. In scholarly terms, Naga, yes, failure could mean no support for your hypotheses. I think that is one interpretation. One outcome would be a failure of that kind, but I don't think it's the only failure. Am I discussing research of design thinking or applying design thinking to all research areas? Your question's a good one, Stephen. I think, and I'm sure that's why you asked it. It's in the context of design thinking for scholars, it's actually applying design thinking to research areas. In terms of the research of design thinking, turning design thinking on the research of design thinking, that's not an area that I would have gone down. Doesn't mean that I couldn't, but that's not the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish. And yes, Jim, you've asked, you know it's design thinking, but don't our human emotions and feelings inform and guide us along the way? Absolutely. That is absolutely the case. And our last question comes from Joe Raylan. Using a model comes across as static, making knowledge appear to be a commodity. I know that IDEO would not sanction this kind of thinking, but how do we capture mutual knowing as socially interactive, not arising it necessarily from a priori knowledge? The model itself is not designed to be static. The model itself is quite literally something that is used as a framework to support exploration. It's a starting point, it's not a stopping point. Design thinking as practiced by IDEO also uses models as a way of engaging non-practitioners with the approach that IDEO uses. They've systematized and codified their model. In fact, I teach a simulation that IDEO sanctioned and designed based on design thinking with one of my partners, Experience Point. But I'm not too sure if that's the question that you're asking, Joe. Perhaps we might take that offline, and I might ask some additional questions for a deeper understanding. Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to announce that we're at time. It is 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. That is the conclusion of our webinar for today. One of the things that I would ask is, before you sign off, if you have any key questions that you would like answered before our next, before the event, we have another webinar scheduled for July 11th. If you could please, either in the chat function now or reflect on it and send me an email. We would prefer the chat function so we can get started. But if you could share what you are interested in exploring with relation to the Network for Leadership Scholars event in August, we're going to dedicate our next one-hour webinar to exploring those questions and those ideas. We had originally intended to explore the concept of emergent leadership at the bottom of the pyramid, and we might still carve out some time for that. But if you have other questions that you would like to explore in advance of the session in Boston, we'd like to make this time as meaningful and as useful for you as possible. So please feel free to share that. I'll leave the chat open for a few minutes as you type your questions in, and I'll capture those in a moment. But thanks again for your time. We greatly appreciate it. The organizing committee for the Network of Leadership Scholars event really appreciate